Right, this for me is number 2. So, I think we'll start with, we had my favourite bookshop in Singapore, so let's go to my favourite haircut, which was in Antigua. It lasted for ages, and it was one of the most sensual things imaginable. If it had gone on forever, that would have been paradise. What else can I say? I remember the book I was reading at the time, not while I was having my hair done. It was the Brothers Karamazov. Maybe I'll come to that one time. Brains, I can't help it, but I've got to go into Brains to start off with, just to establish that that's certainly where we're going to go, so I won't be timid and I'll have a little tickle at it now, I think. We are born as genetically different types of people. We're all genetically different, predisposed to do slightly different things across all sorts of spectra, all sorts of spectrums. People that are more likely to be addicted to things, more likely that they, this, that and the other, everything, absolutely everything. Then society comes along and those completely different, as in that everyone's completely different from everybody else, but obviously we're just hitting each other very closely on the spectrums. We can be grouped together, but we're all different, and then a completely different society hits each individual baby, child, young person, which makes us all different still, but basically still all fitting on various spectrums. Let's talk about society, I think, because that's for sure. Society in the 50s and 60s was one thing. Society in the 2010s and 2000 and the noughties and the tens are a completely different thing. There is just, when I was young, I was happy, to have an old tennis ball and a wall to bounce it on. And I could be happy for hours. A modern child would feel terribly deprived if all she had was an old tennis ball and a wall. Brains there was an old saw, let's call it, I think Americans call it, which I think it's called a saw because it's wrong, is it? Or just because it's an old tale, that people only use 5% of their brain or something, which apparently is not in the slightest bit true. But we could say that ancient cavemen were equally as capable as we are now, and the children of cave people were equally as capable as teenagers with their smartphones. You could teach Stone Age. Stone Age wasn't long ago, actually, so go further back, and you could still teach one of them, the kids of one of them, how to use a smartphone reasonably easily. But the fact is, what I'm getting at here more is the stuffedness of a modern human brain. It is almost continually stuffed with something. There's always something on. I suspect that let's go back to the cavemen kind of people. Cavemen, women and children could be happy sitting and watching bees buzz. A modern child or adult could not be happy sitting watching a bee buzz. And it's nothing to do with the genetics, and it is everything to do with society. And therein lies the danger for the future retiring people. They have been wound up by society. And when, stop. And just go to how a brain works. That if you keep doing something and it doesn't get negative rewards, it gets in any way positive rewards for it, it will establish it as something to do. So modern brains are established that being excited by whatever it might be is a thing to be done. And this has been reinforced over the 60 years of being alive before you retire. So the retiring person with only bees buzzing, let's say, will lead a dissatisfied life because they are a brain that wants to do more. The problem being that modern society, by this getting people to do things all the time, has got people to do things all the time and has monetized it. In other words, it's got people going and charged them for going. So when they get to retirement, they've got a shortage of money. So they can't keep going because going costs. That is to say, in a long-winded, including the brain way, that retirement can and will be miserable for a lot of people because they want to do more but can't. It will be extremely difficult to reprogram the brain to do less and be happy about it. The bees buzzing. To go from watching television or going to the movies or having a very vibrant social life, a very bustling job, and going to bees buzzing is a social shock that most brains will reject. Obviously, modern society will try and, well, it does, cruises and all sorts of going out, all sorts of things, does try and squeeze out the last drops of money from the buzzing brains, because it knows that they'll want to keep the buzz going. But there will be people that haven't got the money or do realise that the last 50 or 60 years has been something that they've had to do but have always looked forward to maybe trying to do something else. as long as that little space has been left in the brain, that little nagging space is there, I think it's possible to inhabit it in retirement. In other words, it is possible to drop all the fuss and commotion that gives the brain so much pleasure and develop getting pleasure from the bees buzzing. But it won't come naturally, because the brain is something that just moves forward. If it's done something in the past, it will have a great tendency to do it again in the future, unless it's reprogrammed, or it has always had this part that it always really wanted to, or has reserved that it could go to or go back to, because childhood, real childhood, is often like this, enjoying the simple things of life. If it's remembered the simple things of life, there's a chance that it will be able to go to it quite naturally. But if it's forgotten completely the simple things of life and has ground on and on, whirring and tearing around for 50 years, it's going to be extremely difficult to stop it in retirement. I think the question now that must be asked, which I don't want to go into something, I don't know what you'd call it, sociology, I don't know what to call it, is a reason for living. Because we could, we've got to the dichotomy, the divergence, the splitting, the big why of life. Do we live life for ourselves, or do we live life for society? Now, I don't want to go into it's best to live life for society. I'll say I'll deal with it some other time. Whether I do or not, another matter. What I'm going to deal with here, and I would think in the medium future, would be what is best for yourself, for everybody's one's self. As in, if we choose to work in a charity shop or this sort of equivalent on a larger or smaller scale when we retire, because that gives us the connection we want with the outside world and the feeling that we're doing good, then good. But what I'm going to always stress is what is best for the individual. And that's what I'll always be talking about, what's best for the individual. All questions always come back to the two questions. If you ask why to anything that can ever be said and just hit it with why, you'll always reduce it down to two questions. One is it best for me? And the other one is it best for society? You know, that is what life comes down to if we ask why questions. And obviously this me talking is kind of a big result of why questions. So we're coming to the end of this one. Can we have a wrap up? Looking back at it, I can see that what I'm saying is, unless the brain has remembered the glory that was the freedom of childhood, unless, how did I say that? Unless it will have a tendency to grind away with what it's been taught by society throughout its life, and it will want to have all sorts of unnecessary excitements in retirement. What I would be trying to encourage is the people that have got the small remembrance of the innocence of childhood, that I'm calling the buzzing of the bees, and try and reproduce it later in retirement, because there will be almost no restraints on that. There won't be any financial restraints on it, as long as obviously you've got enough to a roof over your head, enough to eat, and you can keep warm. As long as you've got the equivalent of buzzing bees or an old tennis ball or an old battered book, whatever it might be, the simple things, it is and always will be possible to have a glorious retirement as you had a glorious childhood. There is absolutely no necessity at all to continue the madness that happened in between. I'll leave it there. End of number 2. We'll see what happens for number 3.